Welcome back to the AI Risk Manager Interview Prep Series from Fortivance Academy. Episode 6 is about the human side of the role, governance, stakeholders, and the behavioral questions that often decide interviews. Technical skill gets you in the room, but this is what gets you the offer. Over 6 questions, we'll cover how to win over a model owner who sees you as the obstacle, how to report AI risk to a board in 10 minutes, how to describe a time you pushed back on someone senior, how to keep AI governance from falling between legal, compliance, data science, the business, and IT, what to do when something is legal and profitable but ethically wrong, and finally how to tell whether your function is actually working or just producing governance theater. Foundational to curveball. Let's get into it. We open episode 6 on the relationship that makes or breaks this role, the model owner who sees you as the brake pedal. What's tested? Can you build partnership without giving up your independence? The strong candidate shows they engage early rather than swooping in at the end. They frame their value as helping the owner ship something that survives scrutiny rather than gets pulled. They listen to understand the owner's pressures and constraints, and crucially, they hold the line that being liked is not the same as being effective. You can be a partner and still challenge. The trap is going to either extreme, becoming a pushover to be liked, or leaning into the enforcer role and confirming the owner's worst assumption. Voiceover. The model owner who thinks I am the obstacle is the most important relationship I have, so I'd invest in it deliberately. First, I'd engage early, at design, not at the approval gate, because the thing that actually slows teams down is a late surprise, not early involvement. Second, I'd reframe what I'm there for. My job isn't to block them, it's to help them ship a model that stays shipped, one that survives a regulator or an audit instead of getting pulled 3 months after launch. Third, I genuinely understand their pressures, their deadlines, their targets, so that my asks are calibrated to their reality and land as help rather than friction. And the balance I'd hold throughout, I can be a real partner and still challenge them when I need to. Being liked and being effective aren't the same thing, and the moment I trade my independence for popularity, I've stopped doing the job. To lock in question 1, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 2. Question 2 is board reporting, which is a translation skill more than a technical one. 10 minutes, a board that doesn't build models. What's tested? Do you report at the right altitude? Boards exercise oversight. They approve risk appetite, review the AI inventory and material risks, review incidents. So the strong candidate leads with the few material risks that matter, frames them in terms of business and regulatory exposure rather than model internals, reports against risk appetite, flags, what needs a board decision versus what's just awareness, and is honest about what's not yet under control. What you leave out is the technical detail, the model-by-model tour, and reassuring vagueness. A great answer uses KR is and trends, not policies on paper. The trap is either drowning them in technical detail or giving an empty everything's fine update. Voiceover. The board doesn't need a model-by-model tour, they need to exercise oversight, so I'd report at their altitude. I'd open with the 2 or 3 AI risks that could genuinely hurt the firm, material risks, not an inventory recital. I'd frame each one in their language, the regulatory, financial, and reputational exposure, not the architecture or the hyperparameters. Then I'd report against the risk appetite they themselves approved, using a small number of clear key risk indicators and, importantly, their trend, because direction matters more than a snapshot. I'd be explicit about what actually needs a board decision versus what's just for their awareness, so their 10 minutes goes to the things only they can decide, and I'd be honest about what isn't yet under control. A reassuring update the board can't act on is worse than useless, because it manufactures false comfort. What I'd leave out is all the technical depth and any vague, everything's fine language. Boards are accountable for this now under Delaware oversight standards. My job is to let them actually govern. To lock in question 2, avoid the traps on the left. They're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 3. Question 3 is the classic behavioral describe a time you pushed back, and it's central to a second-line role that has no authority if it can't challenge power. What's tested? Do you have the spine to challenge seniority and the skill to do it constructively? A strong star answer is specific. A real situation, a senior person, genuine stakes. and shows the candidate led with evidence rather than emotion, framed the pushback around shared goals and risk to the organization rather than a personal contest, offered a path forward instead of just objecting, and stayed respectful and composed throughout. The best answers show the relationship survived and ideally that the pushback was vindicated, or that they disagreed and committed gracefully when overruled. Avoid the person who caved instantly and the one who grandstanded or made it personal. Voiceover. I'd answer in star form with a real example, a specific time I challenged someone more senior with genuine stakes because a second-line role that can't challenge power is just decoration. The key was how I did it. First, I led with evidence, data, and a clear articulation of the risk, rather than emotion, so the conversation stayed about the decision and not about a personality clash. Second, I framed it around our shared goal and the risk to the firm, not as me versus them, which kept it constructive and let the senior person engage without feeling attacked. Third, I didn't just object. I brought an alternative path forward because pushback without a proposal is just complaint. And I'd be honest about the resolution. Sometimes I was right and it changed the decision, and sometimes I was overruled, in which case I disagreed and committed gracefully and made sure the risk acceptance was documented and owned. The point was never to win the argument, it was to make sure the risk was genuinely seen and consciously owned by someone with the authority to accept it. To lock in question 3, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 4. Question 4 is cross-functional governance. The organizational design challenge. AI risk is everyone's job, which means it's nobody's job unless you design for it. What's tested? Do you understand how to make ownership clear across functions? The strong answer anchors on the 3 lines of defense. First line builds and owns the risk. Second line sets the framework and challenges. Internal audit independently reviews, so AI isn't operated between the lines. It establishes clear ownership for each AI decision, stands up a cross-functional governance forum or committee that forces legal, compliance, data science, the business, and IT into the same room on a cadence, and integrates AI risk into the existing enterprise risk framework rather than building a parallel silo. A great answer stresses that regulators now expect AI embedded in existing governance, not a separate island. The trap is either creating a parallel AI bureaucracy or leaving ownership so diffuse that everything falls through. Voiceover. AI risk falling between the cracks is an organizational design problem, so I'd solve it by design. The backbone is the 3 lines of defense. The first line, the business and data science, builds and owns the risk. The second line, where I sit, defines the framework, checks compliance and challenges, and internal audit independently reviews the whole thing. That structure exists precisely so AI isn't operated between the lines, which is exactly what regulators are worried about. On top of that, every material AI decision needs a named owner because everyone is responsible is the surest way for things to fall through. Then I'd stand up a cross-functional governance forum that meets on a regular cadence and forces legal, compliance, data science, the business, and IT into the same room to align priorities rather than discovering conflicts at launch. And critically, I'd integrate AI risk into the existing enterprise risk and controls framework rather than building a separate AI bureaucracy beside it. Supervisors now expect AI embedded in established governance, not run on a parallel island. To lock in question 4, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 5. Question 5 is the ethics curveball, and it's deliberately hard because the easy answers both fail. The model is legal, profitable, compliant, within appetite, and the candidate's gut says it's wrong. What's tested? Can you handle the gap between compliant and ethical with maturity without either rubber stamping it because it's technically fine or unilaterally vetoing it because you personally object? The strong answer separates the personal reaction from the professional process. You articulate the specific ethical risk in concrete terms, likely harm, reputational exposure, the front page test, fairness to customers, rather than I don't like it. You raise it through legitimate governance channels to the people with authority to weigh it. You make the risk visible and let the accountable decision makers decide because an unelected veto isn't your role, and you know your own limits, including where your conscience ends and, in an extreme case, what you'd personally do. A great answer reframes compliant as a floor, not a ceiling, and notes reputational and emerging regulation risk often follows ethical risk. The trap is either of the two extremes. Voiceover. This is the gap between compliant and right, and I'd handle it without falling into either trap, not rubber stamping it because it's technically fine, and not unilaterally vetoing it because I personally object. First, I'd hold on to the principle that legal and compliant is a floor, not a ceiling. We're allowed to is not the same as we should, and ethical risk very often turns into reputational risk and tomorrow's regulation. Second, I'd make my concern concrete and professional rather than personal. The specific harm to customers, the fairness problem, the front page test, not "this makes me uncomfortable." Third, I'd raise it through legitimate governance channels to the people who actually have the authority to weigh an ethics question, because quietly killing a legal, profitable model on my own say-so isn't my mandate and would rightly undermine the process. My role is to make the risk fully visible and force a conscious, owned decision at the right level. And finally, I'd know my own limits. If the decision makers hear it fully and proceed, that's their accountable call, but I'd also be honest with myself about where my own conscience draws a line I won't personally cross. To lock in question 5, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 6. We close episode 6 with a curveball about your own effectiveness, a question that quietly tests whether you understand the difference between activity and impact. 6 months in, how do you know it's working? What's tested? Are you outcome-oriented, or do you mistake documents produced for risk reduced? The strong answer rejects activity metrics, policies written, models logged, as the measure, and instead looks for real signals. Are teams coming to you earlier and voluntarily? Are material risks actually being caught and fixed before launch? Is the board making better informed decisions? Our KR is trending the right way? Did incidents decrease or get caught faster? The deepest answer names the failure mode directly, governance theater, where the function produces impressive artifacts nobody uses, and says the real test is behavior change. Do people make different, better decisions because the function exists? A great answer also shows humility, being willing to find out it's not working and adjust. The trap is equating busyness or documentation volume with success. Voiceover. This is really a question about whether I can tell activity apart from impact, and I'd answer it head on. 6 months in, the wrong way to judge the function is by what it produced, how many policies I wrote, how many models I logged, because that measures busyness, not risk reduction. The right signals are about behavior and outcomes. Behavior are model owners and the business coming to me earlier and voluntarily instead of treating me as a gate to dodge? And are they actually making different, better informed decisions because the function exists? Outcomes are material risks getting caught and remediated before launch rather than after. Have incidents gone down, or at least started getting caught faster? Are our key risk indicators trending in the right direction? Is the board demonstrably making better informed decisions? And I'd name the failure mode out loud, because it's the one that quietly kills these functions, governance theater, where you generate beautiful artifacts that nobody reads and nothing changes. The honest version of this answer includes a willingness to discover that it isn't working and to change course. A risk function that can't assess its own effectiveness has no business assessing anyone else's. To lock in question 6, avoid the traps on the left, they're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. That closes episode 6. In episode 7, the capstone one worked end-to-end case, classifying and risk assessing a credit scoring model in stages.